Atoms and Agronomy. This is Biostats Core Special Topics Talk, number 16, the collision theory of hypothesis and experiment generation. I'm Mark Williamson for the DaCCoTA project at the University of North Dakota. Let's get cracking. So, hypothesis and experimental ideation is often assumed and not taught with any real space, time, or attention. So the goal of this talk is to present ideas to help generate hypotheses, boosting your ability to generate such things. So, I'll cover 4 sections. First, become a well-read monster. Second is bridge different disciplines together. Third is creatively select and prune proposals. And fourth is learn from the best. So, getting a little bit into the introduction. The theory that I'm sort of playing around with here is that colliding ideas together from many sources is a helpful tool for hypothesis and experimental generation. So, again, topics like scientific literacy and the scientific method and statistical analysis are pretty well staples in scientific education. However, hypothesis or experiment generation, sort of the creativity that fuels coming up with interesting and useful questions that you can usefully and interestingly test, is sort of lacking. So let's try to remedy that shortfall in this talk today. And again, this isn't like strictly undeniably research-based. This is more fast and loose ideation. So really take everything with a grain of salt. Nothing here is canon. These are just possible tools that you can use in a toolkit that you can adapt and find what works for you the best. So let's go for it. So the first topic is to be a well-read monster. And our phrase that I'm working off here is you can't really aim at something, let alone hit it, if you don't know the target even exists. So you need to be very knowledgeable about a lot of things, so you not only can know what can be done, but what the tools are available to even do that. Remedying this sort of knowledge gap means you have to read important scientific papers far and wide, not just the recommended reading, not just maybe the narrow specialization that you deal with every day. You need to have a broad mentality. And something that I think is important to help you on this is follow interesting leads. Read interesting looking papers. Even if they don't match your needs right now or right away, it's really surprising if you go down past how much connection occurs or how many important things come up that you didn't even know was going to happen until you are down that path. So, for example, in my life, I had a graduate work in nematodes. I worked nematodes. It's very interesting. Currently, what I do now is epidemiology. Really nothing to do with that there. I'm actually helping develop a radon test chamber for animal experiments with radon in health. And I was trying to figure out how I might even be able to bridge these two things together. And I came across some papers on model organisms for neurodegenerative diseases, because one idea is that radon might have to do with brain or neurodegenerative diseases, or at least that's a hypothesis that could be tested. And so actually taking the idea of there are models of nematodes for neurological disease that you could theoretically put in a radon chamber and test neurological outputs in a sort of low-level way. And so this was, by reading this literature, I was able to bring these two ideas together that I didn't think could go together otherwise. Okay, so let's get into some ideas of how to be, quote, a well-read monster. So first of all, you might want to list important journals that you want to come back to again and again. So it really might depend on field. Maybe you'll have a bunch of genomics journals or statistical journals or whatever field you're going into. You can certainly curate a list by hand. And again, it doesn't have to be all in the same field. In fact, it probably shouldn't be. You can get all the kind of important ones and then be able to go back to it. Like maybe you can even sometimes sign up for lists email list, so it tells you when the journal has a new issue out. And you can also use tools like, for example, Sciamago. You can look up terms. Like, for example, here I've looked up things with statistics and probability, and it's a little hard to see here, but some of my actually go-to journals that I look at anyways are included here, including the Journal of Statistical Software, the R Journal. So that might be one way to start building a possible list by entering search terms in Sciamago or something similar. Now, other things you can do is look at science aggregation sites, so sites that bring up the important news, not just of a specific topic, but across science. I think the best one I've been able to find is Science Daily. I really like it. And it'll have different topics. You can look at specific fields or just all like the latest top headlines. That's one of my favorite things to do, is not just a specific field, but like what's happened, today, yesterday, in the last couple of days. There are other ones too, like Eureka Alert and Advanced Science News. Now, and then this is I think my personal contribution of maybe how you can go about this is what I call Journal of the Day. Now, I've really wanted to have some sort of web service where you could just click a button and it will give you a random journal article, scientific article that you could read, and you could just do that, come back every day and just read a random article and really be able to easily grab something wide-ranging and read it. And I really have not been able to find that, so actually I hacked together something with Python code and created it myself. And I actually have the Python code that will be in the references on GitHub, so you can actually do this yourself. Now, it's pretty messy and actually really could be improved quite a lot. I didn't go with perfection. I did with what more or less works. And it's actually, it's based on taking the top articles from Science Daily, so you of course could aggregate more sources, but I thought it was a good impromptu or at least first level thing to do. So here's just some examples of it. Here's the Python code. I create a function called random journal. All you have to do is just do it in. There's no variables that you enter. You just do it here. It says true, and then it'll open in a new browser page, a random recent journal article. So I did it once, and it did stuff with supernova, which is cool. I did it a second time. Hey, look, I got something more on the lines of biology, looking at urban trees. And then a third time, I got something with chemistry. So it was a great way to get a random journal article of the day. Okay, let's turn to the next topic, bridging or bringing together diverse ideas. So the phrase I'm going to use here is that an intractable problem in one field might be a solved afterthought in another. That science today is very specialized, so it's often easy to get into very specialized niches, silos, whatever you want to call it, and not have a good understanding of what other people are doing. In fact, so a problem you might have might be easily solved or conceptualized in a better way somewhere else. And so it's good to be as interdisciplinary as you can in the right sense of that word. And so the idea of this concept is to really think about how to combine different fields of study or research topic and see where synergies might occur. Because remember, different types of experts have different ways of approaching problems. A great example of this is, I know in more of the social science or psychological literature, in statistics, they talk about moderation and mediation effects, whereas in more classical biology or just statistics in general, the idea of confounding factors or interaction effects are more how things are termed, and those terminologies aren't one-to-one, so it might be useful to understand both concepts when trying to solve statistical problems or modeling problems. Anyways, let's get to some examples of very surprising synergies from different fields that, when coming together, make things better. So maybe one of the famous things here is Henry Ford and meatpacking plants. He actually got his idea of the motor car assembly line from visiting meatpacking plants, and that allowed cars to become much cheaper, much more efficient, and kind of revolutionized travel. Or at least he was greatly accelerated that revolution. Another cool idea is the idea of origami and protein folding, because the idea of how to predict how proteins fold in their 3D structure is a very big problem, or difficult problem to solve in biology. And so taking something as seemingly unrelated as essentially art, or maybe like, I don't know, cultural expression with origami, there's actually can be links together, and I have a reference kind of showing some of that. Another thing, this is sort of off the cuff, I remember the thought of this sort of idea came when I was in a lecture from a polar researcher who had, I believe his wife worked in molecular biology, and he talked about how there's a synergy between looking at wildlife, things like geese flights or geese formation, and then how androgens or other molecular things go together, and how there's a synergy of being able to look at those together. So that's another example. Now, example in my own life here is thinking of like genomic epidemiology. I'm getting more interested in that, but I'm also interested, again, based on my graduate work. I worked in soil ecology, and I find that still really fascinating. But I was unable to try to bring those two together. It's like, well, how can we talk about like soil characteristics, maybe soil health, and say like human health, and maybe things with disease? Well, then I did some training, and I came across the idea of antimicrobial resistance genes in bacteria populations, and how they can actually be harbored in the soil. I was like, oh, hey, that's a connection I never thought I could make. But it was there, that you could actually study maybe how reservoirs of antimicrobial genes in the soil, and that could affect human health. Okay, let's get to some ideas about bringing these things together. So, of course, you could like pick two ideas and browse review articles until you find the link between the two. That's sort of a high-level idea. Another high level is like maybe pick two jobs, maybe like data scientist and I don't know, field zoologist from different fields, and look at some job postings and try to find a link, maybe like shared skills between the two, shared areas of expertise. And then my personal contribution, again, is going to be this thing where I'm calling the Scientific Subfield Collider. This is, again, some Python code I put together, and you can, again, the references, and in the description there is a link to GitHub where you can get this. And this kind of collates together a bunch of subfields of the various sciences that I just sort of stripped pretty fast and loose from Wikipedia list. So I can have about 1,000 different subfields, and then just randomly pick the two and put them together and output them. And so here's the code. The code is called Collider. It gives you a little prompt that says how many collisions you want. You enter an integer, and it'll pop things out, and you can have a lot of fun just seeing these things pop together. I think my favorite one so far has been planetary formation and epidemiology. That sounds like a fascinating thing to try to connect together. I ran this other times too. Here's another 10, so maybe something interesting would be like development studies and quantum biology. Let's look at some other ones. Here's a third one. Let's see here. I don't know, material information selection and fuzzy logic. So there you go. So endless fun to smash together combinations of subfields. Okay, on to our third one, proposal selection. So the idea between here, the phrase I'm going to use is you want to have ways to generate lots of ideas, without filtering too much at the beginning, but then letting the best ones live. There's a lot of ways to do this, but the idea is that good hypotheses or experimental ideas don't come out of nowhere. They won't perfectly come formed in your mind and just need to be enacted. They'll often require to generate a lot of maybe subpar ideas along the way to really get the good ones. And so you want to brainstorm, especially brainstorm enough that it gets around your internal critic, to not let self-censor yourself before getting out. This is an important thing in writing in general, and this is also important for getting ideas. And I learned this from a book on a writer who teaches on writing, James Scott Bell, about research shows that actually persistence and creativity results in better ideas the further you go. So if you work hard to get a series of ideas, and then you keep pushing yourself, you actually be more creative later on than your initial burst of creativity. So that's a good lesson in making sure you're really giving yourself enough time and permission to generate ideas. For example, I've worked a lot on trying to find some research topics when I'm a professor to work on, and I've let myself really generate a lot of ideas and par them down and piece them together, but after several iterations, and this has helped me come up with my current running plans of a big 5 research topic ideas: radon chamber experiments, statistical designs in epidemiology, epidemiological omics, epidemiological taxonomy, and technical applications in epidemiology. These didn't come out of nowhere. This took a lot of ideas that I had to sort of prune or combine or adjust to get to with 5 topic ideas that I'm pretty happy with at this point. Okay, let's get to my ideas here. So of course you could have a standard brainstorming session. There's a lot of great things you can do. Mind mapping is great. Free writing or bullet points. There's also a lot of other great ideas. I have a couple references here on 5 and 6 of different tactics you can use alone or in a team. And here's where some of my special sauce comes in of my own ideas. So the idea of an idea mutation, and I have more examples. I put in a blog post of more examples and the thing behind it, but here's an example to kind of walk you through what you do. The idea is you start with an idea here at the left, and then you have some sort of setup. I have 10 here of things you can do to mutate, to tweak your idea. And then what you do is you kind of split it out. You can do 2 or 3 or even beyond, but I just kind of did 2 iterations here, kind of 2 progressions. And at each branch, you randomly select 10. I rolled a 10-sided dice, and then whatever that lines up, you enact it and see how your idea mutates. And then you have a bunch of mutated ideas at the end that maybe helps you be more creative about that initial idea. So I start out with if I had an idea for a statistical training seminar series, this branch here, I had to make it more extreme, so I did a survival boot camp. Then here I had to make it inverse, so I said a teaching camp. This one, 9, was to add a twist, so I said with a mystery objective. Over on this branch, 7 was more complex, so I had a problem-solving series, and 2 and 8 were harder and spice, respectively. So the harder one was make it time limited. The spicy one is to have a sci-fi theme. So again, there's more examples of it in this post here. Another example I have is an idea bracket, and again, I have examples in this blog post here. The idea here is you start out with however many you want. I just do 8, and it's like a bracket, so think of like a sports bracket where you put them head to head, and then there's like this, the quarterfinals, semifinals, and the finals. Now a little bit of the twist here is it's not just simply the best idea moves on unchanged. You can actually, to make things more interesting, have the 3 M's. You can, if you feel like it's a good thing to do, you can modify something, you can merge 2 ideas, or you can just simply mark an idea that's interesting, that it might not win, but you want to maybe come back to it later. And this is really, there's no you have to do these things, but that's an interesting way to inject more creativity. So these are some ideas of classes maybe I'd like to teach someday or think about teaching. And so you can see here one, I really like this one, but it didn't move on, so I marked it here. Over here, the two here, ecological stoichiometry and soil metagenomics, I thought was so cool. I wanted to merge them together. And how would that work together? But that, in the end, lost out to inventory of bioinformatic tools. Over here, I modified this one to be applied astrobiology because I thought that was more interesting. And then it ended up sort of merging with taxonomy rail taxa to be like taxonomy of unknown taxa, which ended up winning overall. So that is a potential way to brainstorm or modify ideas. Okay, we are at the last one, learning from the best. The idea of standing on the shoulders of giants with eyes wide open is our guiding phrase. You really want to be able to seek out mentors, whether it's physical, virtual, contemporary, historical, that really exemplify generating good ideas. You can read their work, check the results, even reach out and ask questions and thank them if you'd like to. Because the idea is wisdom early is wisdom indeed, that you don't have to invent everything yourself. You can see what the best people have done and replicate it and build off of it. That's really what tradition is, of taking what's best about what we've learned so far and moving forward with it. So a great example in my life here is I actually was looking at, on the right side here, some bioinformatics software that I was trying to figure out how to use, and I actually stumbled across the software is called Freya, and it's actually by the Anderson Lab, and I went to their website, and they had one of the most amazing lab websites I've ever seen. I actually did personally reach out to their lab and thank them for what a great site, and this really gave me great ideas for clear, interesting, and engaging lab websites. So there's an okay, let's get on to some ideas here. Now, here's some possible targets of who you could learn from is Nobel Prize winners. Why not kind of shoot for the moon here? They have them in various fields. I kind of took physics because I thought that was kind of the most interesting at this point here. These are the last couple years. So from, I think this is 2022, 21, and 2020. Actually, I've read a book by Dr. Robert Penrose, so I was happy to see him there. Another target you do is look at high impact journal authors. There's actually places like Web of Science, which shows high impact authors. You can look at categories. So for example, I looked at microbiology here and came up with a list of people, and you could kind of look through that, and maybe even just, this gives you a list of maybe website lab pages you could go to and see what people are doing that maybe are in your field that are really prolific. Here's another kind of interesting off the beaten path. You can look at patent holders. The idea of not just people who had good theories, but people who be able to put into place novel technology, novel chemicals. So this might be more relevant for things like physics or chemistry or engineering, but hey, kind of the sky's the limit here. It takes a little bit to decode some of the references, but there's a Gazette that you can look at that kind of gives you the weekly thing, and you can look through different categories. For example, this was something with processors or kind of electronics graph that one of the patents that involved a schematic, because you almost always have a drawing or some sort of schematic, so you can really browse and find interesting patents that have been recently done. Another idea here, maybe a little bit off the beaten path, is you can look up local grant holders, like who is doing funded research in your area. Who's had projects that have been catalyzed and put forward and found worthy enough to be funded. That might give you a good idea of things. I mean, it's not perfect, but that might be a helpful thing here. So I looked up things at my local university in biology and looked at kind of who's actually been funded recently. And unsurprisingly, I know most of these people here because kind of working in the same field or working in the same university or department. That makes sense. Okay, with that, let's kind of wrap up here. Again, our theory for this talk was that colliding ideas together from many sources is a helpful tool for hypothesis and experimental generation. So we read our way to a mental storehouse of successful experiments. We attacked problems from multiple angles using different disciplines. We created lots of ideas and let the best survive and thrive. And we learned from the best to profit from deposit of wisdom. So with that, here are the references. Again, there are some GitHub links to my Python code, a variety of other sources here, the idea mutation bracket blog post that I've done, and then the other people's resources or papers. So finally, thank you. This I'm part of the DaCCoTA and supported by the NIH Health Award, so please cite us if you find this useful for your research or training. And with that, hypothesize away. Thanks for joining.